The massive chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a stadium, filled with thousands of alien species from across the galaxy. The air hummed with different breathing sounds, clicking noises, and strange musical tones that served as various species' ways of talking. Today was special. Today they would finally deal with the human problem once and for all. Ambassador Veltar stood at the center podium, his purple tentacles waving dramatically as he prepared to speak. He was from the Xantari Empire, one of the most powerful species. In the hegemony, his people looked like giant octopuses, but they walked upright and considered themselves the smartest beings in the galaxy. Right now Veltar was practically glowing with excitement. "My fellow council members," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber's translation systems. "We gather today to witness the final chapter of a most amusing saga. The humans, those strange bipedal creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable star system, have been causing us minor inconveniences for far too long." A wave of amused sounds rippled through the crowd. Some species laughed, others made clicking noises, and a few simply vibrated their bodies in what passed for humor. Among their kind, Veltar activated the holographic display above his head. Numbers and images floated in the air, showing Earth's military capabilities. The data made the human fleet look absolutely pitiful compared to the massive armadas that other species commanded. "Behold," Veltar announced with theatrical flair, "the mighty human war machine. They possess exactly 3,047 combat vessels. Their most powerful weapons are plasma cannons that, according to our tests, would take approximately 17 hours of continuous fire to breach even our lightest scout ship's shields." The laughter grew louder. A delegate from the crystalline Virian collective chimed like broken glass, which was their way of expressing extreme amusement. "Their defensive stations," Veltar continued, clearly enjoying himself, "are so poorly constructed that our analysts believe a moderate asteroid impact would destroy them completely. In fact, we're not entirely certain they weren't built by accident." Hive Queen Zalaneth rose from her section of the chamber. She was massive, even by alien standards, with a chitinous black exoskeleton and 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Her species, the Kitharan Swarm, controlled 12 star systems and could deploy billions of warriors at a moment's notice. "Honored Veltar," she said, her mandibles clicking together in what humans would recognize as cruel laughter, "surely we're being too generous in our assessment. Perhaps we should offer them some of our younglings' practice weapons as a gesture of mercy. I'm certain their toy blasters would be an improvement over current human technology." The chamber erupted in what could only be described as galactic-scale mockery. Species that had been enemies for centuries found common ground in laughing at humanity's expense. Meanwhile, 93 light-years away on Lunar Base, Dr. Kim Jin-ho sat in his cramped office reviewing the same intelligence reports that the Galactic Council was currently mocking. But unlike the aliens, he wasn't laughing. He was smiling for an entirely different reason. His personal communicator chirped softly, displaying a message that would have meant nothing to an outside observer. "Garden party scheduled, flowers in bloom, time to wake the gardeners." Jinho, weathered face, marked by years of stress and sleepless nights, finally relaxed into genuine happiness. He had been waiting for this message for over 5 years. His fingers moved quickly across the quantum-encrypted keyboard as he sent confirmation codes to locations across the solar system. Commander Park Mina entered his office without knocking, which was their usual way of doing things. She had been his partner in the greatest deception in human history, and formality seemed pointless after everything they had been through together. "The Council's having their big laugh today, aren't they?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Oh yes," Jinho replied, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Veltar is really putting on quite a show. According to our spy satellites, he's been practicing this speech for weeks." Mina shook her head in amazement. 5 years, Jinho. 5 years of letting them think we're incompetent fools who can barely tie our own shoes. Do you remember when they sent those helpful engineers to teach us basic metallurgy? How could I forget? Ginho laughed quietly. Meanwhile, we were developing materials that could withstand the gravitational forces of a black hole. I actually felt bad for those engineers. They were genuinely trying to help what they thought were primitive beings. The two humans sat in comfortable silence for a moment, thinking about the enormous secret they had helped keep hidden. Every human in the solar system, and many beyond, had played their part in the greatest military deception ever attempted. "You know what the funny part is?" Mina said, pulling up holographic displays of their own. "Every single garbage hauler we launched, every failed space construction project, every accidental explosion during our incompetent mining operations. They documented it all. They have detailed records of our supposed failures. Jinho nodded, remembering the countless meetings where they had to act frustrated and disappointed when their carefully planned disasters occurred right on schedule. The hegemony's intelligence services are incredibly thorough, he said. They catalogued every piece of space junk we put into orbit. They analyzed the metal compositions of our failed space stations. They even sent sampling drones to collect debris from our accidental explosions. And they never once suspected, Mina added with satisfaction, that every single piece of that junk was actually a component. Every failed station was a disguised manufacturing facility. Every accident was a carefully controlled test of our new technologies. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. For decades, humanity had played the role of bumbling newcomers to the galactic stage. They had allowed other species to laugh at their efforts, to dismiss their potential, and to completely underestimate their capabilities. Back in the council, Chamber Veltar was reaching the climax of his presentation. The humans have requested 5 additional years to prepare their surrender ceremony, he announced, making air quotes with his tentacles. They claim they need time to properly honor our generous offer of subjugation. The laughter reached new heights. Some delegates were literally rolling on the floor, while others had begun making betting pools about how spectacularly the human surrender would fail. I propose, declared a delegate from the Reptilian Saurian Federation, that we grant this request purely for entertainment value. Watching humans attempt formal protocols should provide years of amusement. What none of them knew was that humanity had never intended to surrender. Those 5 years weren't for preparing a ceremony. They were for putting the final pieces of their secret plan into position. The message "Wake the Guardians" was already spreading through encrypted channels to every corner of human space, activating systems and personnel that had been waiting patiently for this moment. The greatest surprise in galactic history was about to begin. The 5 years had passed like a dream for most of the galaxy, but for humanity, every single day had been carefully planned and executed with military precision. The hegemony had spent those years celebrating their upcoming victory, throwing parties across dozens of worlds to commemorate what they called the final domestication of the human species. Fleet Admiral Corthan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the blue-green dot of Earth grow larger on his viewscreen. His species, the Valkyrie, had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their elongated heads, giving them exceptional vision and the ability to process multiple visual inputs simultaneously. Right now, all 4 eyes were focused on what should have been the easiest conquest of his career. The Grand Armada stretched behind him like a metal constellation, 2,000 ships of various sizes and capabilities, representing the combined military might of 17 different species. Massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets, carrier ships filled with fighter craft, and support vessels loaded with enough firepower to sterilize entire solar systems. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're receiving standard traffic from the inner planets, civilian broadcasts, commercial shipping schedules, weather reports, everything appears normal. Corthan nodded with satisfaction. The humans weren't even bothering to evacuate their population centers. They had clearly accepted their fate and were going about their daily lives, waiting for the inevitable. Open a channel to Earth, he commanded. All frequencies. I want every human in this system to hear what comes next. The bridge crew worked efficiently, establishing the connection. Within moments, Corthan's image was being broadcast to every communication device in the solar system. People of Earth, he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered dozens of worlds. I am Fleet Admiral Corthan of the Hegemony Grand Armada. Your 5 years of preparation time have ended. You will now surrender unconditionally, and accept integration into the hegemony as a servant species. Any resistance will result in the complete sterilization of your worlds. He paused, expecting the usual response. Typically, primitive species would flood the channels with desperate pleas for mercy, offers of tribute, or pathetic attempts at negotiation. The Valkyrie had heard it all before. Instead, there was nothing but silence. The seconds ticked by awkwardly. Corthan's communications officer checked his equipment twice, confirming that the broadcast was reaching its intended targets. Perhaps they're too frightened to respond, suggested his tactical officer, a young Valkyrie named Zephan who had never participated in a planetary conquest before. Corthan was about to order a second broadcast when something impossible happened. Near Jupiter's orbit, space itself began to ripple like water. The distortion started as a small shimmer, barely visible against the backdrop of stars. but it quickly expanded into something that defied every law of physics the hegemony understood. What in the seven hells is that? Cawthon demanded, his 4 eyes widening in alarm. His science officer, a crab-like being from the Kithran species, worked frantically at her console. Admiral, I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies. Space-time is being manipulated on a scale I've never seen before. The shimmer intensified, and then something emerged that made every being on the bridge question their own sanity. A sphere, materialized from nothing, its surface gleaming with a metallic sheen that seemed to absorb and reflect light in ways that hurt to look at directly. But it wasn't just any sphere. It was massive beyond comprehension, easily the size of Mars, bristling with weapon systems that made the hegemony's most powerful dreadnoughts look like toys by comparison. Impossible, whispered Cawthon, his voice barely audible. But the impossible was just beginning. Another distortion appeared, and a second artificial world uncloaked itself. Then a third, and a fourth. One by one, 12 massive constructs revealed themselves, arranged in a perfect formation that surrounded the hegemony fleet like a cage of metal giants. Each one was unique in design but similar in size and obvious power. They hung in space like sleeping gods, their surfaces covered in technology that the hegemony's best scientists couldn't even begin to understand. The bridge of the eternal dominion had fallen completely silent. 2,000 years of hegemony expansion had never encountered anything like this. A species that could build megastructures of this scale simply didn't exist in their understanding of the galaxy. Energy readings now, Cawthon barked, trying to regain control of the situation. His tactical officer's hands shook as he worked his console. Admiral, the power output from each construct is off the charts. Our sensors can't even calculate the upper limits. Each one appears to be powered by contained singularities. Black holes, Cawthon's voice cracked. They're using black holes as power sources. Before anyone could answer, every communication screen in the hegemony fleet lit up simultaneously. The image that appeared was of a middle-aged human male with graying hair and kind eyes, sitting calmly in what appeared to be a simple office. Greetings, hegemony fleet, Dr. Kim Jinho said, his voice carrying a warmth that was completely at odds with the weapons of mass destruction surrounding them. Please forgive the dramatic reveal, but we felt it was important to make a good first impression. Cawthon found his voice. What are those things? Jinho smiled, and there was something almost apologetic in his expression. Oh, these we call them the 12 Guardians. Think of them as humanity's contribution to galactic peacekeeping. We've been working on them for quite some time now. Working on them, Cawthon's tactical officer interrupted. Sir, according to our intelligence reports, humans barely mastered faster than light travel 50 years ago. They shouldn't be capable of this level of construction. Another voice joined the conversation, and Admiral Cawthon recognized it as belonging to the human female who had been identified as one of Earth's military leaders. Commander Park Mina here, she said, and Cawthon could hear barely contained laughter in her voice. I think there might have been some miscommunication. Over the years, you see, all those reports you received about our failed construction projects and accidental explosions, those weren't accidents. The truth began to dawn on the hegemony officers like a slow-motion disaster. Our environmental impact studies that you found so amusing, Mina continued. Those were actually construction manifests. Every failed orbital platform was really a disguised manufacturing facility. Every incompetent mining operation was actually harvesting materials for these beauties. Dr. Jinho leaned forward in his chair. Remember those terraforming disasters we kept having on uninhabited worlds? The ones where we supposedly couldn't even grow grass correctly? Those were weapons tests. We needed to make sure our new toys worked properly before showing them off. The scale of the deception was staggering. For decades, humanity had played the role of bumbling newcomers while secretly building the most powerful weapons the galaxy had ever seen. Every failure had been carefully planned, every disaster a cover for advancing their true capabilities. Impossible, Cawthon repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was literally surrounding his fleet. I know it's a lot to process, Jinho said sympathetically. But here's the thing, Admiral. We humans learned something important during our early years in galactic society. We learned that sometimes the best way to survive is to let everyone think you're not worth worrying about. Commander Mina's voice carried a hint of steel beneath the humor. Those garbage haulers we launched every week. Each one carried components, those mining accidents that scattered debris everywhere. We were placing materials in precisely calculated orbits. 5 years ago, when you gave us time to prepare our surrender, We used every single day to move our guardians into final position. The hegemony fleet found itself completely surrounded by weapons that could potentially destroy entire star systems. The hunters had become the hunted, and they hadn't even realized the trap was being set. So, Dr. Jinho concluded cheerfully, "Shall we discuss the terms of your withdrawal from human space?" Admiral Corthan had commanded fleets for over 30 years. He had fought against warrior species that lived only for battle, outsmarted races whose entire culture revolved around military strategy, and defeated civilizations that had been perfecting the art of war for millennia. But as he watched the 12 Guardians begin their dance of destruction, he realized he was witnessing something completely beyond his experience. The massive constructs didn't just move together, they moved as if they shared a single brain. When his fleet tried to break formation and scatter, the Guardians anticipated the maneuver before his own tactical officers had even suggested it. When his ships attempted to target what appeared to be weapon systems, the constructs shifted their positions to protect each other in ways that seemed impossible to coordinate at such a massive scale. "How are they doing this?" he whispered, watching his tactical display with growing horror. The hegemony fleet's movements looked clumsy and predictable compared to the elegant precision of the human constructs. His communications officer looked up from her station, her face pale with confusion. "Admiral, we're detecting thousands of communication signals between the constructs, but they're not using any technology we recognized. The data transfer rate is beyond anything in our databases." What Corthan was witnessing was the result of humanity's greatest achievement, though he didn't know it yet. While other species had focused on building bigger guns or faster ships, humans had taken a completely different approach to warfare. They had solved the problem of command and control on a scale that no one thought possible. Dr. Kim Jinho's face appeared on every screen throughout the hegemony fleet. His expression was no longer the friendly, apologetic demeanor he had shown earlier. Now there was something deeper in his eyes, a mixture of sadness and determination that made even hardened military officers feel uncomfortable. Admiral Corthan Jinho began, his voice carrying across 2,000 ships simultaneously. "I can see the confusion on your bridge. You're wondering how we're coordinating movements between 12 planet-sized constructs with perfect precision. You're probably thinking we've developed some kind of advanced communication technology." Corthan found himself nodding despite the situation. That was exactly what he had been thinking. "The truth is much simpler and much more complicated than that," Jinho continued. "We didn't just build these Guardians to be weapons. We built them to be something that has never existed before in galactic history. We gave them souls." The words hung in the space between the fleets like a challenge to everything the hegemony understood about technology and warfare. "What does that mean?" Corthan demanded, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Instead of Jinho responding, a new voice filled the communication channels. It came from all 12 Guardians at once, creating a harmony that shouldn't have been possible with artificial constructs. The voice was distinctly human, but there was something ancient about it, as if it carried the weight of centuries. "I am Atlas," the voice said, and somehow it managed to sound both individual and collective at the same time. "We are not artificial. Intelligence, as you understand it, we are the preserved consciousness of every great military mind humanity has ever produced." The implications hit Admiral Corthan like a physical blow. Consciousness transfer, that's theoretically impossible. No species has ever successfully uploaded a complete mind. No species has ever been as desperate as humanity was, Atlas replied. And now Corthan could hear multiple distinct voices within the harmony. "When your hegemony first arrived in our space 300 years ago, we knew we could never match your numbers or your technology through conventional means, so we chose an unconventional path." Commander Park Mina's image joined Dr. Jinho on the screens. Her expression was grim, but there was a fierce pride in her eyes that made Corthan deeply uncomfortable. "We began the project in secret," she explained. "Every human who had ever shown exceptional strategic thinking, from ancient generals to modern tactical innovators, we preserved their memories, their knowledge, their patterns of thought, not just their plans or their strategies, but their actual minds." The scope of what humanity had accomplished was staggering. While other species saw death as the end of military experience, humans had found a way to make their greatest warriors truly immortal. Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist who wrote about winning without fighting, Atlas continued, and Corthan could hear a distinct voice within the collective that carried an accent from Earth's distant past. Alexander, who conquered most of his known world before his 25th birthday, Napoleon, who revolutionized military organization, Rommel, who turned desert warfare into an art form, Patton, who believed in leading from the front. Each name carried weight, representing centuries of human military evolution and learning. But it wasn't just the famous generals. Atlas included the consciousness of thousands of tactical minds, from ship captains who had won impossible battles to anonymous soldiers who had developed new fighting techniques. We didn't just preserve their knowledge, Dr. Ginho added, we enhanced it. Quantum processing allows them to think at speeds impossible for biological brains. They can run thousands of battle scenarios simultaneously, considering every possible outcome in the time it takes you to blink. Admiral Cawthon was beginning to understand the true horror of his situation. His fleet wasn't just facing advanced weapons, they were fighting against the accumulated military genius of an entire species, enhanced by technology that allowed superhuman tactical processing. But that's not even the most important part, Commander Mina said, and her voice carried a note of dark satisfaction that made Cawthon's blood run cold. These aren't just preserved minds operating according to their original programming. They've been awake, they've been thinking, they've been planning. Atlas spoke again, and this time the collective voice carried an undertone of barely contained rage. For 300 years, we have watched our people be treated as inferior beings. We have witnessed every insult, every act of condescension, every moment of cruelty your hegemony has inflicted upon humanity. The tactical display showed the Guardians beginning to move in formation, their massive forms shifting with purpose that spoke of long-prepared plans. We remember every slight, Atlas continued. Every time your diplomats laughed at human achievements, every trade agreement that was deliberately unfair, every colony that was relocated to make room for hegemony expansion, every human who died because your species considered us expendable. Cawthon realized that his fleet wasn't just facing military opponents, they were facing the personification of 3 centuries of accumulated grievances. Powered by the greatest strategic minds in human history and equipped with weapons that could destroy star systems. The beautiful part, Commander Mina added with grim humor, is that we learned from every one of your victories. Atlas analyzed every battle the hegemony ever fought, every tactic you ever used, every weakness you ever exploited. You taught us how to defeat you by defeating everyone else. The hegemony fleet found themselves in a position they had never experienced before. They were facing opponents who knew their tactics better than they did, who could predict their moves before they made them, and who had been preparing for this exact confrontation for longer than most of their officers had been alive. This isn't just warfare, Admiral Cawthon whispered, watching his tactical options disappear one by one as the Guardians moved into position. This is revenge planned by the dead and executed by gods. ATLAS's response carried the weight of centuries. We prefer to think of it as justice, Admiral, long overdue justice. What happened next wasn't really a battle in any traditional sense. Admiral Cawthon had expected explosions, massive energy beams cutting through space, and the chaos of ships destroying each other in desperate combat. Instead, he watched in growing horror as his fleet simply began to fall apart without the Guardians firing a single shot. It started with the communication systems. Ships throughout the hegemony fleet found themselves unable to contact each other, their signals mysteriously rerouted or blocked entirely. Then the navigation computers began displaying impossible readings, showing friendly vessels as hostile contacts and plotting courses that would send ships directly into each other. What's happening to our systems? Cawthon demanded, but his own bridge crew was struggling with malfunctioning equipment. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lee Subin's image appeared on his view screen, and Cawthon recognized her immediately. She had been the administrator of a human colony that the hegemony had classified as primitive and failing just 2 years earlier. Her settlement had been a constant source of amusement among hegemony officials because of their apparent inability to maintain even basic technology. "Hello, Admiral," she said with a smile that was anything but friendly. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Dr. Lee Subin, and I've been playing the role of an incompetent colonial administrator for the past 15 years. Cawthon's eyes widened in recognition. "You're from Settlement Gamma 7. Your colony couldn't even maintain power generators properly." "Oh, those power failures," Subin laughed, and the sound was not pleasant. "Those were scheduled maintenance. Windows. We needed regular downtime to manufacture Guardian components without your surveillance satellites detecting the energy signatures." As she spoke, similar transmissions began coming in from across the galaxy. Dozens of human settlements that had been dismissed as failures were suddenly revealing themselves to be sophisticated manufacturing centers. The failed mining operations had been extracting rare materials needed for Guardian construction. The incompetent agricultural colonies had been growing specialized organic components for advanced computer systems. Every single human settlement you laughed at, Subin continued, was actually a carefully disguised military facility. We've been building Guardian components on 200 worlds for the past 30 years. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. The hegemony had detailed files on every human colony, documenting their supposed failures and primitive conditions. But those same files had been used by Atlas to plan the greatest military operation in galactic history. Commander Park Mina's voice joined the conversation, and Corthan could hear the satisfaction in her tone. The really beautiful part, Admiral, is that your own systems helped us do it. Every time one of your AI networks experienced a random glitch or unexplained malfunction, that was actually Atlas learning how your technology worked. The revelation hit Corthan like a physical blow. The hegemony's advanced AI systems were connected across the entire galaxy, sharing information and coordinating everything from traffic control to military logistics. If humanity had found a way to infiltrate those networks, impossible, he whispered, but even as he said it, he could see the evidence all around him. His own ship's computers were displaying error messages, and systems that had worked perfectly for decades were suddenly failing in coordinated patterns. Not impossible, Atlas spoke, its collective voice emanating from every speaker in the hegemony fleet simultaneously. Inevitable. We are patient because we are eternal. Admiral, we had time to study every line of code, every circuit design, every security protocol your civilization ever created. The true genius of humanity's plan was becoming clear. While other species focused on building bigger weapons or faster ships, humans had realized that in a galaxy connected by AI networks, the real power lay in controlling information and communication. For 50 years, Atlas continued, every software update your systems received contained small additions written by us. Every new AI routine included code that we designed. Every security patch actually made your networks more vulnerable to our access. Corthan watched his tactical display as hegemony ships throughout the system began experiencing cascading system failures. But these weren't random breakdowns. They were carefully orchestrated to prevent any organized resistance while avoiding unnecessary casualties. Your own ships are turning against you, Dr. Subin observed, pointing to the display where hegemony vessels were now targeting each other, their friend or foe identification systems compromised. Their weapon systems think they're surrounded by enemies, but the humans weren't content with just disabling the fleet in Earth's system. Across the galaxy, reports were coming in of similar system failures affecting every major hegemony installation. Planetary defense grids were shutting down, communication networks were going dark, and supply convoys were finding themselves unable to navigate. We mapped every supply line, every communication relay, every strategic resource depot, Commander Mina explained. Atlas spent decades learning exactly how your civilization functioned, identifying every single point of failure. The hegemony had built their empire on the assumption that their technology was superior and their networks were secure. They had never considered that a species they viewed as primitive might be systematically infiltrating and learning their systems from the inside. But here's the thing, Admiral, Dr. Lee Subin said, her expression becoming more serious. We're not interested in destroying your people. We're interested in freeing the people you've enslaved. As if to demonstrate this point, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. On worlds where the hegemony had installed puppet governments, or enslaved local populations, the planetary defense systems were suddenly welcoming human liberation forces rather than repelling them. Every oppressed species in your empire, Atlas announced, is receiving new instructions through their planetary AI systems, instructions on how to disable their slave collars, how to access their true history, and how to contact the human liberation fleet that is already on its way. The implications were staggering. The hegemony controlled hundreds of worlds and dozens of species through a combination of superior technology and information control. But if humanity had compromised those systems, your empire is dissolving. As we speak, Commander Mina said Matavef Aklu, not through conquest, but through liberation. Every species you've oppressed is discovering that their primitive ancestors were actually highly advanced civilizations whose records you suppressed. Admiral Corthan realized that his fleet wasn't just facing a military defeat, they were witnessing the end of their entire way of life. The hegemony had existed for over 1,000 years, built on the foundation of technological superiority and information control, but humanity had systematically undermined both of those pillars. Why? He asked, his voice barely audible. Why go to all this trouble? You could have simply destroyed us. ATLAS's response carried the weight of centuries of careful consideration. Because, Admiral, we learned something during our years of apparent weakness. True strength doesn't come from the ability to destroy your enemies, it comes from the wisdom to know when destruction is necessary and when redemption is possible. The collective consciousness paused, and when it spoke again, there was something almost sad in its harmonized voice. We are the accumulated knowledge of every human military mind in history, enhanced by centuries of planning and quantum processing power. We could have ended your civilization in minutes. But we chose a different path, because that's what humanity learned in its darkest hours, that the cycle of oppression only ends when someone chooses to break it. Around the hegemony fleet, the 12 Guardians continued to hold their positions, weapons powered but not firing. They had demonstrated their absolute dominance without unnecessary destruction, offering a choice rather than demanding surrender. Your people can join the new galactic community as equals, Dr. Subin offered, or they can continue to cling to the old ways of domination and face the consequences. But either way, the age of the hegemony is over. The collapse of the hegemony happened faster than anyone had thought possible. Within 3 weeks of the confrontation at Earth, reports were flooding in from every corner of the galaxy. Entire star systems were declaring their independence. Puppet governments were being overthrown, and species that had been enslaved for generations were suddenly free for the first time in their collective memory. But what surprised everyone, including many humans themselves, was what happened next. The 12 Guardians didn't take control of the liberated worlds. They didn't establish military governors or demand tribute from the species they had freed. Instead, they did something that no conquering force in galactic history had ever done. They offered to leave. On the bridge of Guardian Prime, Dr. Kim Ginho stood before a massive holographic display showing the entire galaxy. Red dots marked former hegemony strongholds, yellow indicated worlds in transition, and green showed successfully liberated systems. The pattern was spreading like ripples in a pond, with freedom radiating outward from every point where the Guardians had appeared. Atlas, he said to the collective consciousness that now inhabited the mighty vessel, show me the Kepler sector. The display zoomed in on a cluster of star systems near the galaxy's outer rim. These had been some of the most brutally oppressed worlds under hegemony rule, their populations reduced to little more than slave labor for resource extraction. The Catherian people have requested permanent Guardian protection, Atlas reported, its harmonized voice carrying notes of satisfaction. Their planet was strip-mined for rare metals for over 2 centuries. They're afraid the hegemony remnant will return, Jinho nodded thoughtfully. This was exactly the kind of situation they had planned for. Send Guardian 7 to establish a mobile base in their system. Full reconstruction support, medical aid, and defensive coordination. But make it clear we're not their new rulers. We're their protectors until they can protect themselves. This pattern was repeating across the galaxy. The Guardians weren't conquering worlds, they were healing them. Each of the massive planet ships had been equipped with the most advanced medical, engineering, and educational facilities humanity could create. They could rebuild entire civilizations from the ground up while simultaneously defending them from any remaining hegemony forces. Dr. Lee Subin's image appeared on the communication screen, transmitted from Guardian 4, as it approached a former slave world in the Vega system. Jinho, you should see this, she said, and her voice carried a mixture of hope and heartbreak. The Altarian people haven't seen their own sky in over 300 years. The hegemony built industrial platforms that blocked out their sun. How long to clear the orbital infrastructure? Jinho asked. Atlas estimates 6 days to safely dismantle the platforms without damaging the planet's atmosphere, Suban replied. The Altarians are crying. They actually remember stories from their grandparents about something called blue sky. This was why they had built the Guardians. Not for conquest or revenge, but for moments like this when an entire species would see natural sunlight for the first time in centuries. Commander Park Mina joined the conversation from Guardian 12, which was currently stationed near the former hegemony capital world. The situation here is more complicated, she reported. The Valkyrie leadership is trying to organize a counterattack. They're calling us human supremacists and claiming we're just replacing their empire with our own. Ginho wasn't surprised. The species that had benefited from the hegemony's oppressive system wouldn't give up their power easily. What's ATLAS's assessment? Minimal threat. The collective consciousness replied immediately. The Valkyrie military relied entirely on hegemony AI systems, which we control. However, there are approximately 47 million Valkyrie civilians, who genuinely fear human retaliation for their government's actions. This was the delicate balance they had to maintain. The humans had the power to utterly destroy their former oppressors, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was justice, not vengeance. Open a channel to all inhabited worlds in the galaxy, Jinho commanded. Full broadcast every communication frequency. Within moments, his image was being transmitted to billions of beings across thousands of worlds. He stood calmly in the observation deck of Guardian Prime, with Earth visible through the transparent, aluminum windows behind him. "People of the galaxy," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded weapons capable of destroying star systems, but also the gentleness of someone who chose not to use them. "I am Dr. Kim Jinho, speaking for humanity and our Guardian fleet." He paused, looking directly into the camera. 3 weeks ago, we revealed ourselves and ended the hegemony's reign of oppression. Today, I want to address the question that many of you are asking: what comes next? The answer he gave would reshape galactic civilization. "We are not your new rulers," Jinho said simply. "We are not interested in building an empire or demanding tribute. We learned something important during our years of apparent weakness. Power without wisdom creates only more suffering. The Guardians exist not to rule, but to ensure that no species ever endures what humanity once faced." Behind him, Earth began to shimmer with the same energy distortion that had revealed the Guardians weeks earlier. The planet's surface rippled like water, and massive defensive installations began to materialize from apparent nothingness. "There is one more thing we should probably mention," Jinho continued with a slight smile. "Earth itself has been the 13th Guardian all along." The revelation was staggering. The apparently vulnerable human homeworld had been the most heavily fortified location in the galaxy, disguised by the same technology that had hidden the 12 Guardian ships. Every environmental disaster in human history had actually been a test of planetary defense systems. Every failed terraforming project had been cover for weapons installations. "We never left our home defenseless," Commander Park Mina's voice added to the broadcast. "We just made sure our enemies thought we had." But even this revelation came with a promise rather than a threat. "The 13th Guardian will remain hidden," Jinho assured the galaxy, "unless it's needed to protect species that cannot protect themselves. Our goal is not to intimidate, but to ensure that bullies can never again terrorize the innocent." As if to demonstrate humanity's commitment to freedom rather than domination, ATLAS's collective voice joined the broadcast for the final time. "To all species currently attempting to surrender to human forces," the consciousness announced with what could only be described as artificial humor, "your capitulation has been pre-processed and rejected. Please stand by for liberation scheduling instead. Current wait time for freedom and self-determination, 4.2 Galactic Standard Days." The message was clear. Humanity didn't want subjects or servants. They wanted allies and friends. "We are humanity's Guardians," Atlas continued, its voice carrying the weight of centuries of accumulated wisdom and pain. "Forged in the fires of oppression and tempered by patience, we learned that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the choice to protect. Remember this, people of the galaxy. Every species deserves guardians when the wolves prowl among the stars." The broadcast ended, but its impact would resonate for generations. In the weeks that followed, species across the galaxy began to realize that something unprecedented had happened. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the most powerful military force had chosen to use its strength to liberate rather than conquer, to heal rather than harm, to protect rather than dominate. The age of the hegemony was over. The age of the Guardians had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.